It was a quiet Sunday afternoon in Maplewood, the kind of day where nothing much seemed to happen. People were going about their usual routines, grocery shopping, walking their dogs, or just enjoying the calm before the work week began again. At the local gas station on the edge of town, an elderly man stood by his old pickup truck, carefully unscrewing the gas cap and sliding it into place. He wore a simple flannel shirt tucked into jeans that had seen better days. But there was something dignified about him. His name was Ezekiel Johnson, though most folks around town called him Zeke. Zeke wasn't just any ordinary man. He was a retired U.S. Army veteran who had served during the Korean War. Now 85 years old, he spent his days tending to his garden, sharing stories with neighbors, and occasionally driving into town for supplies. Despite his age, Zeke carried himself with pride, always standing tall even if his steps weren't as quick as they used to be. That afternoon, however, fate decided to test his resilience in ways no one could have predicted. As Zeke leaned over to check the fuel gauge, another vehicle pulled up beside him, a loud, rumbling motorcycle ridden by a burly man covered in tattoos and leather. This was Cade Malone, the leader of a notorious biker gang that frequented the area. Known for his short temper and intimidating presence, Cade wasn't someone people crossed lightly. As soon as he parked his bike, he swung his leg off and turned toward Zeke without saying a word. Unaware of the tension building behind him, Zeke accidentally nudged Cade's motorcycle with his elbow while reaching for the nozzle. It wasn't hard enough to knock it over, but the sound of metal scraping against metal echoed through the otherwise peaceful scene. Cade froze, his jaw tightening as he glared at Zeke. "Watch what you're doing, old man," Cade snapped, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. Startled, Zeke turned around, his hands raised slightly in apology. "I'm sorry, son. I didn't mean to bump it." But Cade wasn't interested in apologies. Instead, he stepped closer, towering over Zeke, and began hurling insults laced with racial slurs. Zeke's face fell. Not because of the words themselves, he'd heard worse throughout his life, but because of the sheer disrespect coming from someone half his age. Before Zeke could respond or defend himself, Cade drew back his fist and delivered a punch so sudden and forceful that it sent the frail veteran stumbling backward. Zeke hit the ground hard, landing awkwardly on the concrete pavement. Gasps erupted from nearby witnesses who had stopped to watch the unfolding drama. Some wanted to step in, but fear held them back. No one dared cross Cade Malone. Lying there, Zeke clutched his chest, struggling to catch his breath. Pain shot through his ribs, and his vision blurred momentarily. But what hurt more than the physical blow was the humiliation of being treated this way, especially in front of strangers. For decades, Zeke had carried himself with honor, always choosing kindness over anger. Yet here he was, humiliated by a man young enough to be his grandson. Cade stood over him, sneering down at the fallen veteran. "That'll teach you to mess with me," he spat, clearly enjoying the power trip. The other bikers in Cade's group laughed nervously, unsure whether to cheer him on or distance themselves from the escalating situation. A few customers at the gas station whipped out their phones, recording the scene as evidence. None of them knew it yet, but this moment would set off a chain reaction that would change everything, not just for Zeke, but for the entire town. Though Zeke couldn't see it from where he lay, help was already on the way. Someone had managed to call his son, a decorated military officer stationed nearby. And when that phone rang, it wouldn't just be a family matter. It would become something far bigger than anyone could imagine. For now, though, all Zeke could do was lie there, trying to steady his breathing while Cade loomed above him, gloating. Little did either of them know the real storm was still gathering strength, and it would arrive faster than anyone expected. Back at the military base just a few miles outside of Maplewood, the veteran's son was wrapping up a long day. He had spent hours training recruits, pushing them to their limits while reminding them of the values that defined true leadership: honor, discipline, and respect. Exhausted but satisfied with the day's work, he sat in his office sipping a cup of coffee as he reviewed paperwork. His phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the silence. He glanced at the screen, recognizing the number immediately. It was one of his father's neighbors, That alone made his stomach tighten. Neighbors only called when something was wrong. With a growing sense of unease, he answered the call. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was frantic. "It's Zeke. He's been hurt. Some guy at the gas station attacked him. It's bad." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. For a moment he couldn't breathe. His father, the man who had taught him everything about strength, patience, and dignity, was lying injured because of some stranger's cruelty. The neighbor quickly filled him in on the details. The biker gang leader, the racial slurs, the punch that sent Zeke crashing to the ground. "I'm calling an ambulance right now," the neighbor added, "but I thought you should know." His hands gripped the phone tightly as anger began to rise inside him. It wasn't just rage, it was a deep protective instinct that came from loving someone so much. Closing his eyes, he took a slow breath, forcing himself to focus. Now wasn't the time to let emotions take over. "Thank you for letting me know," he said firmly. "I'll be there as soon as I can." Hanging up, he sprang into action. First, he dialed emergency services to confirm they were en route to the gas station. Then, without wasting another second, he grabbed his gear and headed toward his truck. But this wasn't going to be a routine visit. This was personal, and he knew exactly what needed to be done next. As he drove, his mind raced. Growing up, he'd always looked up to his father, not just because he was a war hero, but because of how he carried himself. Even when life threw its hardest punches, Zeke never retaliated with hate or bitterness. Instead, he chose grace and resilience, teaching his son that real strength comes from standing tall even when others try to knock you down. But this time, things were different. Someone had crossed a line. They hadn't just hurt an old man. They had disrespected a soldier who had given decades of service to his country. And as far as Zeke's son was concerned, that was unacceptable. Reaching for his phone again, he dialed his commanding officer. When the CO picked up, he explained the situation carefully, leaving out no details. He didn't ask for permission, outright. Instead, he framed it as a request under Article 15 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which allows military personnel to respond to threats against civilians if necessary. The CO hesitated briefly before responding. "Are you sure about this? Bringing in a team might escalate things." "I'm sure," he replied, his voice steady and unwavering. "This isn't just about my father. It's about sending a message that we don't tolerate violence against our elders or anyone else. If these guys think they can get away with this kind of behavior, we're setting a dangerous precedent." After a pause, the CO agreed. Within minutes, orders were issued and a strike team consisting of Marines and MPs began mobilizing. Humvees rolled out of the base, heading straight for Maplewood. Helicopters were scrambled to provide aerial support, if needed. All of this happened in record time, thanks to the urgency in his tone and the clarity of his purpose. By the time he arrived at the gas station, paramedics were already there, tending to Zeke. The sight of his father lying on a stretcher, pale and fragile, ignited a fresh wave of fury within him, but he forced himself to stay calm, approaching the medics to check on Zeke's condition. "He's stable for now," one of them assured him, "but we need to take him to the hospital for further evaluation." Nodding, he turned his attention to the scene unfolding nearby. Cade and his gang were still hanging around, laughing and joking as if nothing serious had happened. Their arrogance fueled his determination. Walking toward them, he stopped a few feet away, his presence commanding immediate attention. "You've got 10 seconds to apologize," he said, his voice low but firm. Cade smirked, clearly unimpressed. "Or what? You gonna cry too?" Before he could respond, the sound of engines roaring drowned out any reply. Heads turned as multiple Humvees surrounded the gas station, followed by the unmistakable thud of helicopter blades slicing through the air above. Dozens of armed Marines poured out of the vehicles, forming a perimeter around the bikers. For a moment, there was complete silence. The bikers exchanged nervous glances, realizing they were outnumbered and outgunned. Cade's smug expression faltered, replaced by wide-eyed panic. "This is insane," Cade shouted, backing away. "You brought the military on us for this?" Without hesitation, Zeke's son stepped forward. "Insane? No, What's insane is thinking you can assault an 85-year-old man and walk away like nothing happened. Assaulting a war veteran isn't just cowardly, it's criminal. And today you're going to learn that actions have consequences. As MPs moved in to detain Cade and his gang, the biker leader tried to protest, shouting threats and curses. But it was too late. Handcuffs clicked into place, and the once intimidating figure was reduced to a defeated man being led away. Witnesses, gathered nearby, watched in stunned silence, unsure whether to cheer or question what they had just seen. Some clapped quietly, grateful that justice seemed to be served. Others whispered among themselves, debating whether such force was really necessary. Zeke's son ignored the murmurs, focusing instead on his father. Climbing into the ambulance, beside him he held Zeke's hand tightly. "I'm here, Dad," he said softly. "We're going to make sure this never happens again." Though weak, Zeke managed a faint smile. "Didn't raise you to start wars over me," he murmured. "No, you raised me to fight for what's right," his son replied. "And that's exactly what I'm doing." As the ambulance pulled away, sirens blaring, he couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: anger, relief, and resolve. This wasn't just about revenge or making a statement. It was about protecting the people who mattered most and ensuring that acts of violence like this wouldn't go unanswered. Little did he know, the events of that day would ripple far beyond Maplewood, sparking conversations about respect, justice, and the lengths we go to defend those we love. The son stood by the ambulance watching as paramedics carefully loaded his father onto a stretcher. Zeke's face was pale, but he managed a weak smile when he saw his boy standing there. "You didn't have to bring the whole army for me," Zeke joked softly, though his voice trembled with pain. His son knelt beside him, gripping his hand tightly. "Dad, you're not just anyone. You've given your life to protect this country, and I'm not letting anyone treat you like this." Zeke sighed, shaking his head slightly. "Son, I've seen worse in my time, but it's not about me anymore. It's about what happens next. Don't let anger cloud your judgment." Before he could respond, one of the medics interrupted gently. "We need to get him to the hospital now." His son nodded and stepped back, allowing them to close the ambulance doors. As the vehicle sped away, sirens wailing, he turned his attention back to the scene at the gas station. Cade and his gang were still surrounded by Marines, their bravado from earlier completely gone. The once cocky biker leader now looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting around frantically as MPs tightened the perimeter. Some of the bikers tried to argue or plead their case, but their words fell flat against the organized discipline of the strike team. Walking over to Cade, the son stopped just a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "You had your chance to apologize," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Instead, you chose to laugh about it. Now you'll face the consequences." Cade glared at him, trying to muster some semblance of defiance. "You think this is justice? This is excessive force. You can't do this." The son crossed his arms, unfazed by the outburst. "Justice isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. What you did today wasn't just an attack on my father. It was an attack on everything he stands for. Respect, honor, service. Those aren't just words to us. They're values worth defending." As MPs began cuffing Cade and leading him toward a waiting Humvee, the biker shouted over his shoulder, "This ain't over. You hear me? We'll see each other again." Ignoring the threat, the son turned to address the growing crowd of onlookers who had gathered around the gas station. Some held their phones up, recording every moment, while others whispered among themselves. He knew this incident would spread quickly: social media, local news, maybe even national headlines. People loved drama, especially when it involved authority figures taking drastic action. But he also knew that this wasn't about spectacle. It was about sending a message. Stepping forward, he raised his voice so everyone could hear. Today, someone thought they could hurt an elderly man, a veteran, and walk away without facing any consequences. That ends now. My father served this country during a time when people like him weren't treated fairly, yet he never stopped believing in the promise of a better future. Today, we honor that belief by standing up for those who deserve respect. His words resonated with many in the crowd, A few people clapped, nodding in agreement. Others simply watched silently, processing what they had witnessed. One woman approached him cautiously, her hands trembling as she held out her phone. "I recorded everything," she said quietly. "If you need it for evidence, it's yours." He smiled gratefully, taking the device from her. "Thank you. Every bit of proof helps." As the situation at the gas station wound down, the son made sure the area was secure before heading to the hospital to check on his father. Along the way, his mind raced with thoughts about what came next. Arresting Cade and his gang was only the first step. There would be questions, lots of them, from the media, the public, and even within the military. Did he overstep his bounds? Was bringing in a strike team really necessary? These doubts gnawed at him, but he pushed them aside for now. All that mattered was ensuring his father was safe and making sure no one else felt powerless in the face of violence. When he arrived at the hospital, Zeke was already in a private room hooked up to monitors and IVs. Despite the ordeal, he looked more comfortable than he had at the gas station. Sitting beside him, the son took a deep breath before speaking. "They've got Cade and his gang in custody," he said. "It's done." Zeke closed his eyes briefly, exhaling slowly. "Good. But tell me something, son. How are you feeling?" The question caught him off guard. For all his focus on protecting his father, he hadn't stopped to think about his own emotions. Anger, frustration, fear. They all swirled inside him like a storm. "I'm fine," he lied, forcing a smile. "Just glad you're okay." Zeke opened his eyes and fixed him with a knowing look. "Don't lie to me, boy. I know you too well. This isn't just about me. You're carrying a lot on your shoulders right now. Let it go, son. You did what you had to do. That's enough." For the first time since the incident, he felt a flicker of relief. His father's words carried weight. They always had. If Zeke believed he'd done the right thing, then maybe he could start believing it too. Leaning back in his chair, he glanced out the window where the sun was beginning to set. The day had been long and exhausting, but it wasn't over yet. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, and perhaps even backlash. But for now, sitting here with his father, he allowed himself a rare moment of peace. Outside the hospital, the town buzzed with chatter about what had happened. Social media posts flooded timelines, videos of the confrontation at the gas station went viral, and debates erupted online about whether the military response was justified. Some praised the swift action, calling it a victory for justice. Others criticized it, claiming it was an abuse of power. Back in the hospital room, none of that mattered. Father and son sat together in quiet companionship, finding strength in each other's presence. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The next morning, news of the dramatic showdown at the gas station had spread like wildfire. By sunrise, Maplewood was abuzz with conversations about what had happened. Local TV stations sent reporters to cover the story, and social media feeds were flooded with videos and opinions. Some praised the military intervention as a bold stand for justice, while others questioned whether it was excessive force. The divide in public opinion only grew wider as the day went on. At the hospital, Zeke's son sat by his father's bedside, scrolling through his phone to see how the incident was being portrayed. Every few minutes, a new notification popped up. Hashtags like "Justice for Veterans" and "Military Response" trended online, alongside heated debates about accountability and authority. He sighed, setting the phone down. "It's getting out of hand," he muttered under his breath. Zeke, who had been dozing off, opened one eye and gave him a knowing look. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" He nodded. "Yeah, I did. But knowing doesn't make it easier." His father shifted slightly in the bed, wincing from the pain in his ribs. "Life never promised easy, son. Sometimes doing the right thing means stepping into the storm, even if it gets loud." The son chuckled softly, though there wasn't much humor in it. "Loud is one way to put it. People are calling me everything from a hero to a tyrant. Half of them don't even know the full story." "That's the thing about people," Zeke replied, his voice gentle but firm. "They see what they want to see. Don't let their noise distract you from why you did this. You stood up because someone needed protection. That's all that matters." Though Zeke's words offered some comfort, the weight of the situation pressed heavily on his son. Later that day, he left the hospital briefly to meet with his commanding officer. They needed to discuss the aftermath of the operation and address any potential fallout. Walking into the CO's office, he braced himself for tough questions. "Tell me how we're handling this," the CO said without preamble, gesturing for him to sit. He took a deep breath before responding. "Cade Malone and his gang are in custody. We've secured witness statements, video evidence, and medical reports detailing my father's injuries. Everything points to assault, harassment, and reckless endangerment. Legally, we're covered." The CO leaned back in his chair, studying him closely. "Legally, yes, but morally, publicly, this isn't just a military matter anymore. It's become a national conversation." "I understand that," he replied, his tone steady. "But here's the thing, sir. This isn't about me or the military. It's about sending a message that violence against vulnerable people won't be tolerated. If we don't take a stand now, what kind of example are we setting?" The CO nodded slowly, clearly weighing his words. After a moment, he spoke again. "You're right. Accountability matters. Just remember, actions have ripple effects. Be prepared for criticism, and maybe even consequences." As he walked out of the meeting, those last words lingered in his mind. Consequences. What form would they take? Would he face disciplinary action? Would the military's reputation suffer? There were no easy answers, but he reminded himself of one truth. He'd acted to protect his father and uphold values worth defending. Back at the hospital, Zeke was sitting up in bed looking slightly better than the day before. A nurse had brought him breakfast, a tray of bland hospital food, but he seemed content enough to eat it. When his son returned, Zeke raised an eyebrow. "How'd it go?" "As well as can be expected," he admitted, pulling up a chair. "They're supportive, but they warned me to brace for backlash." Zeke nodded knowingly. "That's life, son. Every choice comes with its price. But remember this. When you act out of love and principle, you'll always find peace in your heart no matter what happens outside." His words struck a chord, grounding him once again. For all the chaos swirling around them, their bond remained unshaken. Together, they spent the rest of the afternoon talking quietly, sharing stories, and reflecting on the events of the past 2 days. Meanwhile, the town of Maplewood continued to grapple with the fallout. At the local diner, patrons debated over coffee and pancakes. One group argued that the military strike team had been necessary to restore order, while another insisted it set a dangerous precedent. "It's not about the army showing up," said a middle-aged woman sipping her tea. "It's about respect. That poor man got punched for no reason. Nobody deserves that." Across town, a community meeting was called to discuss the incident. Dozens of residents packed into the town hall, eager to share their thoughts. Zeke's neighbor, the one who had made the initial call, stood up to speak. "Zeke Johnson has lived here for decades," she began, her voice trembling with emotion. "He's a good man, a kind man. Seeing him treated that way broke my heart. I'm glad someone stepped in to protect him." Others echoed her sentiments, expressing gratitude for the swift response. However, not everyone agreed. A younger man, near the back, raised his hand hesitantly. "I get why people are upset," he said cautiously, "but bringing in the military feels extreme. Shouldn't the police handle stuff like this?" The room erupted into murmurs, with voices rising in disagreement. The mayor, presiding over the meeting, tried to restore order. "Let's focus on solutions," he urged. "How can we ensure something like this doesn't happen again?" By the end of the meeting, one thing was clear. The incident had sparked a larger conversation about safety, respect, and community responsibility. While opinions varied, most residents agreed that violence against elders, or anyone, couldn't be ignored. That evening, Zeke's son visited the gas station where it all began. Yellow tape cordoned off the area, and a few curious onlookers still lingered nearby. Standing in the same spot where his father had fallen, he closed his eyes, replaying the moment in his mind. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. Turning, he saw the woman who had handed over her phone recording earlier. She held out a small bouquet of flowers. "These are for your dad," she said shyly. "Tell him we're thinking of him." Touched, he accepted the gift with a grateful smile. "Thank you. He'll appreciate it." As she walked away, he noticed something else. A makeshift memorial left by locals. Notes, candles, and photos adorned the space, paying tribute to Zeke and condemning the attack. Among the messages, one stood out. "Respect our elders. Honor our heroes." Reading those words, he felt a surge of hope. Despite the controversy and division, the community had rallied together in support of his father. In that moment, he realized that the fight wasn't just about punishing Cade. It was about fostering unity and reminding everyone of the values that bind them. Walking back to his truck, he glanced at the flowers in his hand and allowed himself a small smile. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for now he could take solace in knowing that they weren't alone. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as a family and as a community. In the days following the incident, life in Maplewood began to settle into a new rhythm. The initial shock of the confrontation had given way to quieter conversations about its aftermath. For Zeke's son, the whirlwind of media attention and public debate started to ease, but the emotional toll lingered. Every morning he woke up with a sense of heaviness, knowing that the choices he made would ripple far beyond his family. Still, there was no time to dwell on what-ifs. His father needed him, and the community was looking for answers. At the hospital, Zeke was making slow but steady progress. His ribs were bruised, not broken, and while the physical pain was manageable, the emotional scars ran deeper. He didn't talk much about the attack itself. His focus remained on healing and moving forward. But his son could see the weight it carried. One afternoon, as they sat together in the quiet of the hospital room, Zeke finally broke the silence. "You know," he said softly, staring out the window at the cloudy sky. "I've lived long enough to know that change doesn't come easy. People want justice, sure, but they also want someone to blame. That's human nature." His son nodded, leaning back in his chair. "And right now, everyone's pointing fingers. Some at me, some at Cade, some at the system. It's exhausting." Zeke turned to look at him, his eyes filled with wisdom earned through decades of experience. "Son, you can't control how people react. All you can do is stay true to your values. Did you act out of love? To protect? Then hold on to that. Everything else will sort itself out." It was easier said than done, but those words stayed with him. Later that week, Zeke was discharged from the hospital, and the two returned home together. Their house wasn't grand. It was modest, with creaky floors and faded wallpaper, but it felt like a sanctuary after everything that had happened. Neighbors stopped by throughout the week, bringing meals, cards, and offers of help. Some simply wanted to sit and listen, giving Zeke space to share his thoughts if he chose to. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm golden light across the living room, Zeke's son decided it was time to address the elephant in the room. Sitting across from his father, he cleared his throat. "Dad, I've been thinking. This whole thing has stirred up so many feelings, not just anger, but sadness too. Sadness that we're still fighting battles like this in 2023. That someone like you, who gave so much for this country, could be treated this way." Zeke sighed, setting down the book he'd been reading. "I won't lie to you, son. It hurts. Not because of what happened to me, but because it shows how far we still have to go. Racism, violence, disrespect, they don't disappear overnight, but every generation gets a chance to push things forward. Your generation's turn is now." His son leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "How do we even start? There's so much division, so much noise. People are yelling louder than ever, but are they really listening?" Zeke smiled faintly, his expression thoughtful. "Start small, talk to people. Build bridges instead of walls. You don't have to fix the world all at once. Just plant seeds where you can." Inspired by his father's advice, Zeke's son began reaching out to members of the community. He attended local meetings, listened to concerns, and shared his own perspective without judgment. At first, it was uncomfortable. Some people were wary of him, unsure whether to trust his intentions. Others challenged him openly, questioning why he'd involved the military in the first place. But he stayed patient, remembering his father's words. Stay true to your values. Over time, relationships began to shift. A group of veterans invited him to speak at their monthly gathering, where he talked about the importance of protecting elders and standing against injustice. Teachers at the local high school asked him to visit classrooms, sharing stories about his father's service and the lessons he'd learned growing up. Even skeptics began to soften, recognizing that his actions weren't driven by ego or revenge, but by a desire to create positive change. Meanwhile, Zeke himself became a symbol of resilience for the town. Though he preferred to stay out of the spotlight, his quiet strength inspired others. When a local charity organized a fundraiser to support elderly veterans, they named it in his honor, Standing Tall for Our Heroes. Dozens of residents came, together to volunteer, donate, and spread awareness. One Saturday morning, Zeke's son accompanied him to the event. Held in the town square, it featured food stalls, live music, and booths offering resources for seniors. As they walked through the crowd, people greeted them warmly, thanking Zeke for his service and expressing admiration for his courage. "It's amazing, isn't it?" Zeke murmured, glancing around at the bustling scene. "All these people coming together, for me of all people." His son grinned, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Not just for you, Dad, for what you represent. Strength, dignity, hope. That's what they're celebrating." By the end of the day, the fundraiser had raised thousands of dollars, enough to provide critical aid to dozens of elderly veterans in need. As Zeke stood on stage during the closing ceremony, he looked out at the sea of faces and felt a surge of gratitude. "I never thought my little story would matter to anyone," he admitted, his voice steady despite his age. "But here we are, united by something bigger than ourselves. To each of you, thank you, not just for supporting me, but for proving that kindness still exists in this world." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the square like a promise of better days ahead. Back at home that night, Zeke's son reflected on everything that had transpired. The journey hadn't been easy. There were moments of doubt, frustration, and fear, but it had also brought unexpected gifts, renewed connections, deeper understanding, and a renewed sense of purpose. As he tucked his father into bed, Zeke reached out and squeezed his hand. "You did good, son. Real good. Now rest. Tomorrow's another day." He smiled, feeling a rare moment of peace. Tomorrow might bring challenges, but for now, he allowed himself to believe in the possibility of change, not just for his family, but for everyone who dared to dream of a brighter future. Months had passed since the incident at the gas station, and life in Maplewood had settled into a new kind of rhythm. The town was quieter now, but the events of that day continued to ripple through its people, shaping conversations and actions in ways no one could have predicted. For Zeke and his son, the scars, both visible and invisible, remained, but so did the lessons they'd learned about resilience, community, and hope. One crisp autumn morning, Zeke sat on the porch of their modest home, sipping coffee as golden leaves swirled around him. His ribs still ached occasionally, but he refused to let it slow him down. He liked sitting here in the mornings, watching the world wake up. It gave him time to think, to reflect on everything that had happened, and everything that hadn't yet. His son joined him after finishing some yard work, wiping sweat from his brow as he plopped into the chair beside him. "You know," he said with a grin, "people keep asking me if I'm going to write a book or something. Lessons from the gas station incident, they call it." Zeke chuckled, shaking his head. "If you do, make sure you spell my name right. And leave out the part where I almost fainted from embarrassment." They both laughed, the sound mingling with the rustle of leaves and distant chirping of birds. But beneath the lightness of the moment, there was an unspoken understanding. They were different now, changed by what they'd been through. "People are still talking about it," Zeke's son continued, leaning back in his chair. "Not just here in town either. That story about Dad, a veteran standing tall despite everything, has spread farther than we thought. Schools are using it in assemblies. Community groups are holding discussions. Even the military is sharing it as an example of leadership under pressure. Zeke raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. Me? An example? I didn't do anything special, just tried to fill my tank without causing trouble. That's exactly why people admire you, his son replied earnestly. You didn't fight back. You didn't lash out. You showed grace even when someone treated you like dirt. That's not easy, Dad. Not everyone can do that. Zeke looked away, staring at the horizon. Grace isn't always a choice, he admitted softly. Sometimes it's survival. Growing up, I didn't have the luxury of anger. If I let every insult or injustice break me, I wouldn't be here today. So yeah, maybe I handled things differently than others would have, but it wasn't because I'm brave, it's because I had to be. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. After a moment, his son nodded slowly. Still, it matters. People need reminders that strength doesn't always look like fists or weapons. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, like you. The conversation shifted as they talked about the future, how the town had grown closer, how neighbors checked in on each other more often, and how young people seemed inspired to take action against injustice. Zeke's son mentioned that he'd started working with local schools, teaching kids conflict resolution skills and encouraging them to stand up for what's right without resorting to violence. It's not much, he said humbly. But if even one kid grows up knowing they have options besides hate or fear, then it's worth it. Zeke smiled proudly. Sounds like you're planting seeds, just like I told you to. A few weeks later, the town held its annual Veterans Day celebration, and this year, it felt different. The event was bigger, brighter, with more attendees than ever before. Families brought blankets and picnic baskets, gathering on the grassy field near the memorial park. Flags fluttered in the breeze, and children ran around laughing as volunteers handed out free hot chocolate. When it came time for speeches, the mayor stepped up to the podium, thanking veterans for their service and sacrifice. Then, unexpectedly, she turned to Zeke, who was seated in the front row with his son. We'd like to recognize someone special today, she announced, her voice warm. A man whose courage reminds us all of the true meaning of honor and dignity. Please welcome Ezekiel Johnson. The crowd erupted into applause as Zeke stood slowly, gripping his cane. For a moment he hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. But then he caught his son's encouraging nod and made his way to the stage. Standing before the microphone, Zeke took a deep breath. I didn't expect this, he began, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. But if sharing my story helps even one person remember that we're stronger together, then it's worth it. Life throws punches sometimes, literally and figuratively. But we don't have to fall apart. We can rise, together. The audience roared, many rising to their feet in a standing ovation. As Zeke returned to his seat, his son leaned over and whispered, See? Told you they love you. Zeke rolled his eyes playfully but couldn't hide the pride shining in them. In the months that followed, the impact of that speech spread beyond Maplewood. Local newspapers wrote articles highlighting Zeke's message of unity and resilience. Social media campaigns encouraged communities nationwide to honor veterans not just with words, but with action, by supporting programs for elderly vets, advocating for better health care, and fostering environments where respect and kindness thrived. For Zeke's son, the experience reinforced his belief in the power of connection. He continued balancing his military duties with community outreach, finding joy in bridging gaps between generations and backgrounds. Whether mentoring students, organizing fundraisers, or simply listening to someone's struggles, he carried forward the legacy of his father's quiet strength. As winter approached, Zeke spent more time indoors, reading books and writing letters to old friends. One evening, as snow began to fall outside, he called his son into the living room. I've been thinking, he said, holding up a worn notebook. Maybe it is time to tell our story. Not for fame or glory, but to remind people that change starts small, with ordinary folks deciding to care a little more, listen a little harder, and act a little braver. His son smiled, feeling a surge of warmth. We'll write it together, Dad. Your wisdom, my perspective, a team effort. And so, they began, Sitting side by side at the kitchen table, they pieced together memories, reflections, and hopes for the future. It wasn't always easy. There were disagreements, edits, and moments of doubt, but the process brought them even closer. By spring, their story was ready. They titled it simply, Standing Tall, Lessons from a Lifetime of Service. When it was published, it resonated deeply with readers, becoming a beacon of inspiration for communities everywhere. Through it all, Zeke remained humble, insisting that the real heroes were those who kept showing up, day after day, choosing compassion over cruelty. His son agreed, adding only one thing. Heroes aren't born, Dad. They're made, one decision at a time. As the years went on, Maplewood became known not just for its picturesque charm, but for its spirit of unity and resilience. And at the heart of it all were two men, an 85-year-old veteran and his devoted son, who proved that even in the darkest moments light could shine through.